Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 28th of November in London. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, concern over France's political and financial outlook fuel growing investor fears. Research shows black graduates are twice as likely to be denied top jobs in the UK. Plus, preparing for a new Cold War. The Nordics and Baltics lead the way in showing Europe how to get ready for a more dangerous world. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. French stocks and bonds have faced turmoil over fears of a crisis facing the government. Bank stocks tumbled in Paris yesterday, with BNP Paribas sliding as much as 3% and Société Générale finishing down the day 3.5%. The moves come as the French government faces a potential no-confidence vote over the budget, which could oust Prime Minister Michel Barnier within weeks. Bloomberg's Mark Cudmore says things are only set to get worse.
The longer-term story has been there. We knew about this weeks ago. We knew about it even going into the US election. We now know, going up to the budget, which is likely to come to a head in December, that it's going to get much more tense for France. The backdrop here is the Eurozone has suffered 2 years of stagnant, sluggish growth, and it looks like next year will be equally bad. So this is in a multi-year kind of slump, lack of growth.
Our Markets Live executive editor Mark Cudmore there, speaking on Bloomberg Television. The political uncertainties also affecting the country's bonds. The spread between French and German 10-year yields widening to the most since 2012. The government faces another hurdle today when left-wing parties have called a vote in the National Assembly to repeal major reforms to the pension system, which were passed last year. The United States is weighing additional curbs on sales of semiconductor equipment and AI memory chips to China. The latest restrictions, which may be unveiled as soon as next week, would stop short of earlier proposals and affect fewer Huawei suppliers. Here's Bloomberg's Debbie Wu.
We are seeing that the Biden administration is weighing additional measures to China's access to chip equipment and then AI memory chips. But at the same time, previously we reported that there's going to be a 6 suppliers sanction, but now it looks like the Biden administration is only to sanction 2. That's
Bloomberg's Debbie Wu, who says the measures followed months of deliberations by US officials and negotiations with allies in Japan and the Netherlands. The Biden administration has also faced intense lobbying by American chip equipment makers, who've warned that tougher measures would hurt businesses. The Fed's preferred measure of underlying inflation accelerated slightly in October compared to a year ago. It's the latest sign that the US inflation's steady decline has stalled and helps to explain policymakers' more cautious approach to lowering rates. Here is Bloomberg's international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee with the numbers.
It is exactly what economists thought it would be. 0.2 rise in the headline PCE for the month of October, and that puts us at 2.3 for year over year, and a 0.3 rise in the core, 2.8% year over year, and both of those are increases over where we were.
Bloomberg's Mike McKee. The core personal consumption expenditures price index, or PCE, strips out volatile food and energy items. The index rose by 0.3% from a month earlier. Donald Trump's pick for Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, is among a number of the president-elect's political nominees who've been targeted with bomb threats and hoax phone calls. The President-elect's transition team said that several cabinet picks and appointees faced, quote, violent, un-American threats to their lives and those who live with them. Some of the attacks are said to have involved a practice known as swatting, a form of harassment in which a caller falsely reports a dangerous incident to law enforcement in hopes of provoking an armed police response. The FBI says it's investigating the incidents. The UK's pharmaceutical, medical and transport equipment industries will be among the most exposed to any new tariffs which might be imposed by Donald Trump's administration. That's according to UN data analysed by McKinsey's Global Institute, which shows the US is the top export destination for 9 UK sectors. That's greater than the exposure for similar industries in France and Germany. Trade between America and Britain was worth in excess of £300 billion in the year through March. Almost 2/3 of that comes from services, though, which are not expected to be hit by tariffs. And black applicants are twice as likely to be denied top jobs in the UK after finishing university. That's according to new research from consultancy Bain in partnership with the Black Talent Charter. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
Black graduates apply for more roles in finance, law and professional services, but are half as likely to receive an offer. And a new survey shows that rejection rates for those applying from outside the country's leading universities are even higher. That's a factor that does not apply to non-black applicants, according to the analysis. The findings come after Bloomberg reported that city firms are pulling back on diversity efforts more broadly. Natasha Ferguson, COO of diversity charity the Taylor Bennett Foundation, says conditions at some firms prevent progression for ethnic minorities.
The culture attracts young talent in, but the culture pushes middle talent out. Middle management is where you see the most concentration of diverse talent at the moment across all sectors.
That was Natasha Ferguson from the Taylor Bennett Foundation. When it comes to graduates, the research puts the disparity down to recruitment barriers, including socioeconomic factors and a lack of knowledge about the corporate world. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Those are your top stories on the markets. On Wall Street yesterday, the S&P 500 pulled back from all-time highs, finishing down 0.4%, led by weakness in big tech names. The Nasdaq fell by 0.9%. There were no surprises in the US data out yesterday. The PCE price index data met expectations, the 10-year yield rallying 4 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index softened by 0.7%. The standout performer yesterday was the Japanese yen, which strengthened by 1.3%. It's a touch weaker this morning, trading at 151.47. In Asia today, we are looking at the Hang Seng down by 1.2% amid reports the US is considering fresh sanctions to curtail Beijing's access to crucial semiconductors. Chinese shares more broadly being affected too. In a moment, we'll bring you the latest on the political and market turmoil in France. Plus, we have a special report on how Nordic and Baltic nations are preparing for a possible new Cold War. But in the story that caught our eye this morning, Beth Coates from Bloomberg Opinion has been writing about the latest advice from Warren Buffett, not for investing, but for life. So earlier this year, the Oracle of Omaha published a letter which included his insight on how to leave behind a strong family and a lasting legacy. He talks about donating more than $1 billion in Berkshire Hathaway shares to 4 family foundations. That's a continuation of his commitment to give away the vast majority of his wealth to charity rather than pass it on to his family. But as always, as Beth points out, there's quite a lot of wisdom contained in these sorts of announcements from Warren Buffett. Among the advice, as distilled by Beth in her article, don't create dynasties. Don't leave basically so much money to your children that they don't have to do anything. Instead, give them something to be able to do something with their money. To acknowledge the good fortune, be transparent about their plans for the future. He suggests having conversations about what's in a will before someone passes away, and live below your means. Now, Warren Buffett is someone that still lives in the same house in Omaha he bought in 1958, and he refers to his savings that he's accumulated over his life as units of deferred consumption. This is, of course, speaking to his philosophy around compounding and the importance of it. And finally, he says to tell your kids you're proud of them. So you can read more on Beth Coates' piece at bloomberg.com/opinion. Let's go to France next and more on the political instability there. Markets continuing to fret over whether the government will be able to pass its budget for next year. This as the National Assembly will vote later on a proposal to reverse changes to the country's pension system, which was one of the major reforms passed under Emmanuel Macron last year. Our Paris reporter Caroline Conan joins us for more this morning. Caroline, how likely does it look at this stage that this government will fall over the budget?
It's actually pretty likely. The risk is pretty high. You've seen in the markets over the past couple of days, the spread between the French and the German 10-year rising to the highest since 2012. So clearly there's a lot of anxiety on the market that this government is going to collapse, if not next week, perhaps the week before Christmas. And today we're actually going to have this interesting possible vote on the repeal of the pension reform. And it's going to be a test if there is a vote, because the National Rally of Marine Le Pen might join forces with the left wing, which could obviously be something that we would see if there is a no confidence vote over the next few days. So clearly, Macron supporters are very anxious, like they've put 1,000 amendments, for example, today on this vote on the pension reform. And Le Pen has been arguing over the past few days that clearly the no confidence vote is on the table if she doesn't get her way on the budget, if she doesn't get her red lines go through in the negotiation process.
Is there any sense that those negotiations will yield anything for Marine Le Pen. What are the key things that she wants included in the budget?
So there are a few things. For example, pensions, indexation on inflation. You know, this is something that Michel Barnier wanted to delay until the middle of next year. She doesn't really agree with the new proposal of having some of it in January, some of it middle of next year, because really she doesn't want pensioners to have less money in their pockets, especially those low income pensioners. Then the second thing she said was a red line, our prices on electricity. She doesn't want to raise any taxes on electricity. Also on medicine prices, one of the things that the Barnier government proposed in this budget is to raise the prices on medicine, or perhaps lower the amount that you get back from the Social Security when you buy some medicine. She is totally against that. And she also says that we should instead cut spending on immigration and cut spending on some of the administration, make the government more efficient. So clearly, there is a sword of Damocles. We knew this confidence vote was going to happen at some point, but it seems like the calendar is accelerating. And one of Macron's minister, Marc Fesneau, who's actually the one in charge of the relations with the parliament, said we are like turkeys waiting for Christmas.
Caroline Collin in Paris. Now, Nordic and Baltic countries are showing the rest of Europe how to prepare in case Russia's war spills over from Ukraine. Governments, central banks and companies there are leading the way on stockpiling emergency grain and medical supplies, making the financial system more resilient and getting households to store canned food and iodine tablets. Our Nordic managing editor, Kati Poyan-Paulo, joins us now for more. Kati, good morning. Why are European countries stepping up these preparations now?
There's just a general awareness now in Europe that war isn't something that you read about in history books. And the primary job of a government is to keep their people safe. So that is really, that's been bringing this awareness to the forefront, that they need to prepare for a risk of war. But it's not just that. Climate change is real, it's happening. We've seen really bad weather impact events, such as the floods in Spain not too long ago, a few years ago in Germany, devastating floods. So there's just this sort of understanding that the more prepared you are, the better you can handle a crisis when it hits.
Kati, you're based in Helsinki. Why is Finland seen as a yardstick for other countries in terms of preparedness?
That's right. I mean, that preparedness mentality here goes back a long way. Organized work on government preparedness really started in earnest in the 1950s, and it pulls in together the private sector as well, associations, and ordinary citizens are given a role. So there's just this sort of general awareness that a potential threat is always there. Finland's surrounded by sea from most of its trade partners. So in a crisis, it becomes an island. And so it makes sense to store goods, store a grain, stockpile within the country.
What are other countries doing about this? And how is the EU getting involved in coordination?
There's a lot happening actually right now. A lot of countries have given advisories to their people on what to do in the event of a crisis. Lithuania has done that. Sweden just last week started mailing leaflets to its all of its households, 5.2 million of them, on how they should be prepared to act in any kind of an emergency. Denmark started recently thinking about banking system resilience. And for example, if power went out for a week, how would you buy groceries? So they're working on a system in Denmark where your card payments would still go through during that week, with the banks and the retail sector sharing the risk there. In Lithuania, you're seeing a lot of stockpiling medicines, and part of that is an EU push to start 22 medical stockpiles in 16 member nations. So the EU's role is really pooling resources, and it can kind of wake up some of the countries that have less of a tradition of preparedness. they've really the EU is going back to its roots. It was born to safeguard peace in Europe and to take care of security for its citizens. And this is exactly what it's starting to do more now.
One of the key guidelines that is coming out as part of this is asking people or advising people to stock food and water for 72 hours. Just talk us through how that's playing out in places like Finland and Denmark.
So the idea of 72 hours is to buy time for the authorities to organize a response to whatever the crisis happens to be. So if they can rely on just regular people like you and me to be prepared to have food and water in the house and be able to stay there without authorities immediately coming in to help, it buys them time to muster a response. And it also lets them attend to those who need their help the most, those who can't prepare for themselves. And there's also reportedly some people think that more than 72 hours would be too long and they probably wouldn't do it. So, of course, the authorities would like us to prepare for a week, but it sounds like a long time. Would you have weeks worth of water in your house?
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.